afterwards, please go and see Haley and Liz doing that. So we've been doing a series kind of looking at what we do and why we do it, and really focusing in on what we do in this time, right, during our worship. Because if you're an outsider, it's really weird not having a poll here. I like putting my hand on it. If you're an outsider and you come into our worship, we're going to do things that probably are a little strange. And if you just grew up doing the same thing over and over and over again, what ends up happening is we just do it because that's what we've always done, and things begin to lose their meaning. And we don't want that, do we? We don't want things to lose their meaning. And so we've been looking at, right, we looked at baptism, we looked at worship, we looked at prayer, we looked at communion. And this is our last week that we're going to be doing this, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about tithing, about giving. And I know, no one likes to talk about money, but we're going to talk about money just a little bit. So the kids, I always have a fun game that I like to play, and even some of those that have graduated will remember my guess what I'm thinking game, right? There is a right answer, and no, it's not easily found, but I want you to try to guess it. So we're going to play guess what I'm holding, okay? Yeah, I know, it's little. It's a seed, a penny. All right, so we'll go, you know what? I'll give you penny. So y'all probably wouldn't know what this is, even if I handed it to you, and that's okay. So a couple years ago, man, I'm getting old. Back when I was in my first year of grad school, which was, it's been 10 years, I had the opportunity to go to Israel. And so I was in Jerusalem and went to a antiquities dealer and picked up this little coin. So it's a widow's mite. And so I don't know if y'all are familiar with the story, but right, Jesus, he comes and he's watching as all these people are giving to the treasury, right? They're giving to God. And there's a lot of people coming up, and a lot of people are bringing a whole lot of money. And then you had this widow. And the widow comes up, and this is what she put in, right here. It's a little piece of copper. And Jesus says, right, all these other people, they gave out of abundance. They had a lot, and they gave a lot, but it didn't really hurt, right? And yet, here you have this widow. She comes, and she gives everything. And I think that's an appropriate story for us to start as we begin to talk about giving, right? And what's at the heart of it. Because, I was always told and heard, and right, the 10%. You give 10%. And so I remember in high school I had a job, and there was an expectation that when I got my paycheck, where was 10% of that going? To church, right? That's what you do. That's what you do. And so I want us to kind of look at where that comes from a little bit. And so we're going to be in Exodus chapter 13. We're going to look at 2 Old Testament passages today. This is Exodus chapter 13, verse 11. When the Lord has brought you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your ancestors, and has given it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all the firstborn of the womb, all the firstborn of your livestock that are males shall be the Lord's. But every firstborn donkey you shall redeem with a sheep. If you do not redeem it, you must break its neck. And every firstborn male among your children you shall redeem. When in the future your child asks you, what does this mean? You shall answer, by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. from the house of slavery. And when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the human firstborn to the firstborn of animals. Therefore, I sacrifice to the Lord every male that first opens the womb, but every firstborn of my sons I shall redeem. It shall serve as a sign on your hand and as an emblem on your forehead, that by the strength of the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. That's kind of an odd passage, I mean, if we really think about it, especially an odd practice. I know we have some ranchers in here, right? Ranchers run cattle. Down in San Angelo, a lot of people ran goats. I mean, you keep up with your cattle, right? You know which ones are which, and you know when you have a new heifer and which ones have, if I'm not mistaken, often they're first, they don't do very well. A lot of the moms don't necessarily do as awesome. Can you imagine for every single one of your heifers, the firstborn male from that heifer, like getting rid of it, killing it? Does that make sense? It really doesn't. I mean, even if you were to sell it and give the money away. And yet here we have in a culture where they're not necessarily selling their livestock. I mean, what are they doing? They're raising it to eat, right? What does it make sense when you have a new calf or a new lamb? You take care of it, right? You raise it, and why do you raise it? So you can eat it. Okay? I mean, that's the purpose. That's the purpose. And yet, here we have the firstborn. The firstborn is God's. But there's a reason for that. What's the reason? Why is the firstborn God's? What was it? So you will remember. Okay, so we talk about this, and we talk about tithing, we talk about giving. And I think that the really important place to start is to look at the Old Testament, to look at the law. Even before that, I mean, Abram is the first one to tithe, right? He gives 10% to Melchizedek, and that's way back in Genesis. And here we have the firstborn being given to God to serve as a reminder. And then if we flip over into Deuteronomy, I want to flip over to Deuteronomy real quick, and we're going to get a little bit more explanation as far as what's going on in this. All right, so this is 22, coming out of Deuteronomy 14. Set apart a tithe of all the yield of your seed that is brought in yearly from the field, in the presence of the Lord your God, in the place that he shall choose as a dwelling for his name. This will eventually be Jerusalem. You shall eat the tithe of your grain, your wine, and your oil, as well as the firstlings of your herd and flock, so that you may learn to fear the Lord your God always. But if when the Lord your God has blessed you, the distance is so great that you are unable to transport it, because the place where the Lord your God will choose to set his name is too far away from you, and you may turn it into money. And with the money secure in hand, go to the place that the Lord your God will choose. Spend the money for whatever you wish, oxen, sheep, wine, strong drink, or whatever you desire, and you shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God, you and your household rejoicing together. As for the Levites residents in your towns, do not neglect them, because they have no allotment in the inheritance with you. So this gives us just a little bit more context. And I think it's important context. You know, I'm gonna break this down a little bit because it's a little wordy. What it's saying is, take the first fruits, go to Jerusalem, and have a feast. That's what it's saying. All right. You know, when we think of sacrifices in the Old Testament, and not completely wrong in thinking in this terms, but often we're thinking of appeasement, right? We think of the sacrificial system and we think, well, the purpose was to appease God. And I don't know, there's a little bit of that. And y'all have heard me talk about this, that the blood, that the sacrifice, it's really a gift, not to God, but to us. And so as we're talking about this and we're looking at Deuteronomy, what is the purpose of giving the tithe? Is it for the sake of God? It's really for the sake of the people, right? What are they doing with it? They're celebrating. And where are they celebrating? In the presence of the Lord. They're taking these first fruits that, honestly, they could just as well just put in they could store it up, save it for later. Times might get hard, but God says, you're going to trust me. You're going to bring these, and we're going to have a meal together. You're going to know who provides for you. And you're going to trust that he's going to continue to provide for you. That's what the tithe was about. It's trust, right? It's trust. Really, everything in the life of Israel was surrounded by this, right? By tithing. And I think I'm going to rephrase tithing here, okay? Because tithing is a weird word, isn't it? We don't use it very often. Sometimes we use it at church, and some of y'all, when I said tithing, I could see it on your faces. You were like, what? Tithing is orienting our life to God. Okay? Tithing is orienting aspects of our life to God. This is what the Israelites were doing. When it came to their agriculture, when it came to their livestock, you know how much work it would be to know whether it was, a ewes first lamb? Wait, is that right? Did I get that right? Yeah, I got that right. Yeah, see, this is... How would you keep up with that? I mean, they didn't have tags in the ears like they do nowadays. Don't you think that was work? That's hard work. And yet, what were they called to do? They were called to keep up with stuff like that. Guys, every aspect of their life was surrounded and oriented to who God was and what God was doing. That's what tithing is. So often let's be honest, we think of tithing and we think of the plate that gets passed, right? We think of that golden, shiny little plate with like the red little felt at the bottom being passed around, and that's tithing. And guys, that's an aspect of tithing. But just like Jesus talked about with the widow, you could give money. That doesn't mean that you're tithing. That doesn't really mean that you're orienting your life to God. And you're orienting your finances to God. And so I want us to take a second and really think, what are the first fruits that we need to tithe today? What are the things in our lives that we need to orient to God constantly? And I think there's 3 of them when it comes to this. And the first one is, I really think they go in order. The first is time. No, the first is not money. The first is our time. How do you choose to spend your time? And I think the harder question is, are you placing God as a priority in the choices that you make about your time and how you spend it? And now this is not me trying to guilt you about, you can't miss a service, you can't miss a Bible class, because this is daily life. The way that we choose to spend our time, are we placing God first in those decisions? And I'm going to answer that question for most of us, and this includes me, and I think often the answer is no, we're not. Because we see giving, we see faith as something that we have certain times for, like now, but not as something that is calling us into continual relationship with God, daily, moment by moment. Because this is what's happening in the Old Testament, right? God is, the whole point of giving is to be called into relationship. When we give our time, when we tithe our time, when we place God as a priority in the way that we spend our time, we are being drawn into relationship with Him. But often we let other things get in the way of that. It could be school. Often it's sports, work, TV, social media. There's so many things that we allow to draw us away. Because it's not about literally serving nonstop. It's not about being in this building nonstop. It's about how are we honoring God with the way that we live our life. If we're honoring God, I think we're oriented to Him. We're pursuing after Him. We're giving our time. We're putting the priorities that we need to in place. So the first one's time. The second one is relationships. Still not money, see? First, we have to give our time and place God as a priority. And then in our relationships, we have to place God as a priority in our relationships. And that's not just our family relationships, that's all relationships. So sorry, I know it may be a little easier to love your family. It's a whole lot harder to place God first and love some other people, because there are some difficult people in our world and in our lives, right? I think the question we ask is, what's at the heart of our relationships with others? What's at the heart? And if we are orienting our life to God in this area, at the heart of every relationship that we have is Jesus. And the way that we treat other people is the way that Jesus would treat other people. The way that we love, the way that Jesus loved. The way that we rebuke and we call to something greater is the way that Jesus would do it. Now, that's an important one, guys, because we live in a time that's divisive, extremely divisive. But at the heart of our relationships has to be God. And y'all guessed it. What's number 3? Money. I'm going to tell you, if we're orienting our time and our relationships to God, the money comes a lot easier. We have to have those other things in place. And if we don't, and I don't mean this in a really harsh way, but who cares that you're giving? I'm just saying, because I'm going to tell you, your money is not what saves you, right? Giving is not what saves you. When our lives, the other aspects of our lives are turned to who God is and to pursuing God, giving, our money, it no longer just becomes an obligation. Because when I was in high school, that's what I felt. Guys, giving, and when my parents told me, you got to give 10%, that was not something I wanted to do. My heart probably wasn't in the best place, right? I was thinking, that's my hard-earned money. I need that. Right? I got to pay for gas. I really liked food, so I need to buy food. What if I want to take Haley out to, this is later, but what if I want to take Haley out to dinner when I finally drive the 4 hours to go see her, which I also had to pay for the gas for that, right? Giving money was an obligation. I'm going to tell you guys something. Giving, while sometimes we have to push through, and I think God calls us to, it should be a joy. Guys, when we give our money, when our life is oriented in a way that is pursuing God in the other areas, when it comes to opening our hand and giving financially, it's a whole lot easier. Because we know that this is not what it's about. It's not. It's not about money. As much as the world tells us it's about money and it's about things, it's not. In each of these, I think that Jesus speaks a great truth that we need to hear. This is Matthew chapter 6, verse 21. For where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. So I think the question we have to ask ourselves is, where's our treasure? Where are we putting a priority in how we spend our time, in our relationships, in our finances? Where's our treasure? Is it here? Or is it there? You know, every week we give an opportunity for those that need prayers, that want to celebrate, can come and do that. And we want to do that this week too. And I also just want to call you guys to really reflect, especially those that are, we're going to be going to school, things are going to be kicking off pretty quick. In what ways do you need to change the priorities in your life? Because we all have priorities that we need to change. So this week, be thinking about that. Be prayerful about it. That God's going to show you the priorities that you need to change and lead you to something that's better than what you could imagine. And that's a relationship with Him and a trust knowing that He's going to provide and take care of you and your family. If you have any need this morning, won't you come while we stand and sing?